of one of the reasons they were so afraid to go in is because these cities were huge. They were fortified. You'd find that out if you go read the book of Joshua and see things like Jericho. But they talk about big people. And they talked about these people called the Nephilim. Hey, welcome to this week's episode of Ask the Pastor. We do this every week where you can text in questions that kind of expand upon a little bit of what we talk about Sunday during our sermon and as we go through our series. And maybe there's a topic that you'd like to dive in a little bit deeper in, shed a little more light on, and we take this time to answer those here and not do a lot of research before, but usually I look these up, pull them up right before I go and try to get through as many as I can. But this week, we talked about this story as we've been going through the series of Crossing the Rivers, of how before Israel went into the Promised Land, Moses selected these 12 leaders, one from every tribe, and had them scout out the Promised Land. And if you know the story, they came back, 10 of them had a very negative report. 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, had a positive report, but the negativity just spread like crazy. And fear just went like nuts through the camp, was contagious to where there were maybe 2 million people that were in the wilderness were just afraid out of their mind. 600,000 fighting men would not go in, and God ended up punishing them for this. But one of the interesting parts and details of this story is they make claims of one of the reasons they were so afraid to go in is because these cities were huge. They were fortified. You'd find that out if you go read the book of Joshua and see things like Jericho. But they talk about big people. And they talk about these people called the Nephilim. And our first question today we'll start with is, do the Nephilim still exist today? My answer is I have no idea. Maybe maybe it's a conspiracy theory, I'm sure, out there that like Bigfoot or the Yeti man or some sort of alien sightings, maybe those are Nephilim. But I guess first let's define what a Nephilim is and go back. And really the first time this word comes up in this description as people is back in Genesis, in the time of Noah. And in the Nephilim in that time, it says the son of men came down. And there's 2 interpretations. Some believe these were just mighty, big, strong men that were, for whatever reason, maybe bred on some higher protein, and they were just large, big men, and they bred with some other people, and they just made huge people that kind of dominated and made these big nations that would conquer people. Others believe those son of men refer to fallen angels, possibly even demons, who then bred with humans and made these hybrid these angel human people that were like giants and super scary. Now, fast forward to here, there's a lot of weird stuff here. Is one, you could ask, did they really see Nephilim? Because this could have been a tactic that they didn't even see them, but the progression of their fear in spreading this report, they were like, first they were mighty men, and then they were giants, and then they were Nephilim, and their imagination grows and grows. Because some of the questions might be like, are the Nephilim even still around? Because they were around when the world was really evil with Noah, but then God wiped the slate clean. So were these truly descendants of Nephilim, or were they just big giant people that you see, what we'd see later with Goliath, like King Og, who Moses killed, and the people killed in the Promised Land? But I guess at the end of the day does it matter? Yes, these people are big. Yes, these people are scary. But really where Israel was failing the test here is they were so scared by these big people that it crippled them to think that God couldn't conquer it. And before we'll put a pin in that, I think we'll come back to it. Because here's, I think, another question that then dovetails on this. Because what God would ultimately call, and there would be a break in here after the punishment, eventually they do go in the Promised Land. And they have to kill people. They kill these lands. They raise them. They kill giants if the giants were there. But the question that pops up here is, why does it seem like God always told people to kill people in the Bible? And really, we're talking about the Old Testament here. And the question on that is, does that happen today? Say there is Nephilim, or there's some evil people, or some crazy giants there. Is God going to tell you to go kill people like he told Israel? And people might have some differing views on this, but here's what I would say the basic answer is no. Jesus changed things. In the Old Testament, they were driving out pagan nations who were against Yahweh, who were against God, who were never going to come in. And God actually miraculously saves people through that. And you see his grace continually. Characters like Rahab and even Darius, when you talk about in captivity in Babylon, God uses people from other nations. But a lot of times there's these evil nations that were constantly pushing these false idols, these false gods, these demons sometimes they're worshiping against Israel. And one of the reasons they were doing this is they were purging that land and setting up places of hope that honored the true God. But you fast forward to the New Testament, and not saying that violence is never an answer. People sometimes still need to answer for justice. There's nations have rights to attack other nations. But as Christians, is there ever a time that's justified that we wage physical violence on another people? As Christians, as the church? And I say the answer is no there. You think of the life of Jesus, and we see the acts of violence that sometimes happen when literally when he was being arrested, Peter took out his sword and cut a guy's ear off and was ready to fight on behalf of Jesus. And what did Jesus do? He rebuked Peter and he healed the man. And we see the disciples that turned into the apostles that started the very church. They constantly had violence against them, but they didn't fight back. And so they spread a message of peace and hope, and that God's kingdom isn't one that on our side of the church now, that we're spreading with violence and we're spreading with conquering like Israel had to in that day, but we're spreading with a message of hope and grace and love. So does God call us to be violent today? No. Are there times when maybe you have to protect your family, protect your nation, and stand up for justice and evil? Absolutely. But God is not going to tell you to be a soldier, to put a sword in your hand and go kill pagans like we see in the Old Testament. Which lastly, I think, as we wrap this up, is like, so what does that mean when it comes to things like this? And our fear, like we talked about this week, is that maybe God's not going to put a giant in your path or say, go kill all these people and take this land, which are legitimate things to be scared about. But the lesson we can learn from that is there might be some huge obstacles in your life that you are scared so much about taking that next step. If I were to, maybe you're scared that if you lose your job now and go for that next job that you think will be better, that you're going to put your family at a risk and you could never take that step. Or maybe you feel like you're called to move to another city or engage a relationship with this person if you're not married, whatever that looks, and you're too scared to cross that river to go on this adventure because you feel like the failure is too big, the obstacle is too hard. The check we have to have in our heart is, do we have enough faith in our God that he is big enough to overcome that? Because Israel's sin here wasn't being afraid of giants. It was being afraid that their God was too small to conquer those giants. Do we have something in our lives we are too afraid to think that God isn't big enough to overcome? Hey, thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next week.